There's a question here asking if you can repeat the 7 sacred Cherokee plants.
The 7 sacred plants are tobacco, eastern red cedar, New Jersey tea, prairie willow, American ginseng, golden seal, and rattlesnake master.
Okay. And what is the full name of the rattlesnake plant?
In English, we call that rattlesnake master. I would have to pull up and look at the scientific name, but it's generally known as a rattlesnake master plant.
Okay. And do you use sweetgrass at all?
Sweetgrass isn't commonly used by us. That's not to say, I mean, sometimes today we've kind of adopted different things. And so I do know that some Cherokees do use sweetgrass, but it really wasn't something that was more traditionally used by us just because we didn't really have it available. You know, cedar and tobacco are really the things that we would use that would be similar to that.
Okay. I think if you can see the questions if you want to go ahead and just answer.
I am scrolling through those now. Thank you. I'm glad to know that everybody enjoyed the presentation.
It's great to have Susan Harjo here. She's been an incredible advocate for Native country.
Susan, I see that you're asking how abundant the hickory nut trees are. Here in this area, they're very abundant. I know we were just out in the field a couple months ago, and a good majority of the trees where we were at were hickory nut trees. So, you know, it kind of depends on where you're at, but especially here where we're at, they're very abundant. It's not too hard to find them in this area. The wild grapes, the possum grapes that we provide are native. They're kind of a little bit of a different, you know, they're not very big. So the grape itself is probably about the size of the end of your pinky. Most people find that it's better to eat them later in the year. Especially a lot of people kind of tend to wait until after it starts to get cold, because if you get them too soon, they can be kind of bitter and aren't always the best taste. But yes, possum grapes are native. The best way to start tobacco, I'm assuming that we're talking about growing tobacco. So generally what we suggest, because tobacco can be kind of tricky to get started, but once you have a bed that has been started and is growing well, it's usually will self-grow every single year. But the best way to get it started is, what we do is we actually go and buy the small, like indoor greenhouses is what they call. Basically, it's the little peat moss or peat pot things that you would get at some place like Lowe's or Walmart. And they're just small peat, and you kind of put them in, and like I said, what's called is an indoor greenhouse, but they're probably only about 2 feet long by about another foot. And we do about 3 to 4 seeds, or really just kind of a pinch of seeds, because tobacco seeds are so small. It might even just be better to just try to get a small amount on your finger and put each of those in one of those pots, and then mist them with water. The thing about tobacco is when it's first starting, everything about it is weak. The roots are really weak. The seeds are really tiny. So you really just kind of want to mist it with water and then put that plastic covering on over the entire setup. If you start to notice it drying out, which if you have that kind of a setup, it generally really won't dry out. But if you start to notice it drying out, once again, just sort of take a spray bottle or something and sort of mist it again. You don't want to water it too heavily. As the tobacco actually starts to grow, once it gets a couple inches tall, then a good thing to actually do is to put a fan around the same in the room. You don't want to put the fan directly on the plant, because they tend to be so weak that getting that little bit of what we call a wind breeze coming from that fan will help to strengthen the stem and will help to strengthen the roots. And then you actually want to wait until the plant is about 6 inches to 8 inches tall before moving it outside. So introducing that wind breeze from the time that it's about a couple inches, an inch or 2 inches tall, until it's about 6 or 8 inches tall, will make it a little bit stronger. So that way when you move it outside, it's going to be tougher. We're actually working on doing a new plant guide. It's probably not going to be available quite yet this year, but that's one of the things that we will include in that, is how best to start tobacco. And if you're needing more information on that, or kind of need a reminder on all of that, because I went through that too quickly, once again, email me. We have it already all typed up, and I can just send the instructions to you. Once tobacco is growing, once you've had a good year with it, The seeds that fall from the tobacco will generally will stay in the ground and it'll grow on its own the following year. You don't really have to reseed it and do all of that every year, but initially getting it started can be a little bit tricky. Currently, the plans for the use of river cane in the garden, it really kind of varies. We've had so many issues within the last couple of years because of the river cane dying off that it's not as abundant as it was. But we do, I mean, part of the thing with the river cane is that you really do kind of want to thin it out. And so we've actually had people come out and harvest the cane for the purpose of using it for baskets. Sometimes we harvest it even for ornamental or decorational purposes. And when we start having large die-offs, then obviously we try to go in and we try to cut out all of the dead cane, and then we leave it up to people if there's any purpose that they have for it, or sometimes when we thin it out and it is live cane, we allow people to come and pick it up. At the moment, we really don't have a large enough stand to say that it's going to be used for anything in particular. River cane takes so long to really start growing and really start doing well. And like I said, in the case of ours, it's sort of a good portion of it's dying off, where it's sort of self-thinning out every year, that we're trying to just really keep it growing and keep it looking healthy. But as we do have cane available, then we will, and especially if we have it in abundance, then we oftentimes will put out a public call and say if anybody wants to come and get some, they can. As long as somebody's just needing to harvest a very small amount, that's something that we can allow sometimes now by request. But for large amounts, our stand just isn't big enough, and it will probably be, it could still be decades before it will be big enough. And I didn't read through the whole thing, but yes, we have had some people harvest it, as I said, for baskets. It's not quite the full amount of size that you would want to have for that purpose, and that's kind of the last time that we had somebody come in and harvest it for the purpose of splitting for river cane baskets. We kind of had a tough time finding, they were just needing really about 10 stalks for demonstration purposes, and we had a hard time finding any cane within our stand that was going to be big enough for that. Eventually that might be something that we're able to do more of, but we're still looking at years before it's going to be good for that. As far as bacterial wilt being a problem in the seeds from prior affected candy roasters, no. The wilt doesn't actually get into the seed. It exists more in the vine of the plant itself. It's not something that we have to worry about in the fruit or in the seeds. But what it does do is, like I said, it's more just that it keeps the plant weak. And so we may not get as much fruit on a plant as we generally would. And the plant might actually start to die out before it's able to produce viable seeds. And our purposes, generally we get a lot of fruit every year, but what we're really growing for the purpose of is not to get good edible fruit, it's to get good viable seeds that we can then distribute through the seed bank and use for us to grow the following year. And so that's really the problem that we run into with wilt. For the average person, as long as you can keep your plant growing and keep it alive throughout the year, you're generally going to get enough fruit that it's going to be good for you, and you'll probably get enough seeds to be able to continue to grow on the following year. For us, we really need large amounts of all of that. So that's really the problem that the wilt proposes more than anything for us. And yes, we generally only use seeds from the Cherokee Nation garden. So kind of what happened there is when the Cherokee Nation seed bank was first started, the idea was that it was sort of an exchange. So we would distribute seeds to the citizens, and then we asked them if they had a good year to mail seeds back to us. But a lot of these seeds have problems. They easily cross-pollinate. And so we get, cross-pollination pretty easily coming from corn, pretty easily coming from squash, pretty easily coming from gourds. And occasionally it can happen with beans. And that was part of the reason that we quit accepting seeds back, because it was just, sometimes you can't even tell whether or not you're having problems with cross-pollination until you start growing plants from the seed. And so we only distribute seeds through the seed bank that either we have grown specifically or that we know where they're coming from and kind of have been pre-vetted. Sometimes if we still get seeds in from somebody, we'll have an individual mail us a large amount of seeds. We don't actually put that into the seed bank stock for what we distribute. but we will oftentimes find somebody or a purpose for it somewhere else. Something like corn, if somebody were to send a large amount of corn back, we might use that for grinding purposes for demonstrations or something on those lines. But we try to make sure that what we're sending out to the citizens is going to be seeds, plants like it's supposed to be. So that way they're getting things that, they know what they're getting, and there's no chance of it being something that has been cross-pollinated. Once again, sage is not a common plant that was used by us, more because it's not really native to the area that we are from. So kind of like with sweetgrass, you don't see a whole lot of like white sage and things being used by us. That's not to say that people don't use it today, but it's not one of our traditional plants. We do not have a clay-based soil. It's been so long since the pH has been checked on the soil in the garden. I could not say for sure what the pH is on our soil. What I will tell you is that our site, where the majority of our plants are growing, is a really, really poor site. The soil there is kind of awful. So we do a lot of amending every single year by adding organic materials back into the soil. So already this year, we've been going and getting grass clippings from where our maintenance actually cuts the grass, and then they dump it out. We get grass clippings, we get raked leaves, dead bags of dead leaves, really about any organic material that we can get a hold of. We will throw that back onto the soil out in the garden and then till all of that in. And usually a couple times a year, we go and get generally it's manure from cattle that we can add back into the soil, trying to get everything back up to where it's a really, really good soil to use, because the truth is that the site we're growing on is really kind of poor for most things, and it's not a site that we would recommend for this, but we've found a way to make it work over the years. So it's really poor soil. We have not used the worm manure tea. It's probably something that could be used. It's not something that we have used, so I can't say too much. We do have a lot of problems with heat stress here in Oklahoma. I can see, yes, it definitely would be a problem in Southern California. Mostly with our stress plants, the biggest thing that we can do is really just keeping the plant cool. So a lot of times that's watering the plants in the afternoon when it's getting too hot. And then treating them with something like DE to try to keep the numbers of the insects and things down that are going to be causing problems. Currently, I do not have a book that I would recommend on native plants. There's kind of a lot of different things out there, and it really kind of depends on what you're interested in. So it's actually a question I get a lot, but at the moment, I do not have anything that I could recommend as a good book for native plants, especially medicinal uses. We would really have to vet that. So I know I've gotten a few things over the years, but I think a lot of times for what people are sort of looking for, it doesn't always work. And even the book that we have, there was a book that one of the Cherokee Nation groups had worked on years ago, but it only has about 20 plants in it and doesn't really go, it sort of goes over the medicinal uses of the plants, but doesn't really go into a whole lot of detail either. Just because, a lot of times we're pretty careful about getting that information out there too much. So at the moment, I don't have anything that I could really recommend as far as that goes. We don't really accept too many donations at the moment. Generally what we suggest is get the seeds, grow them, help them do well, and then, if you have family and friends, community members who are interested in growing these seeds, and to kind of help us out in that sense. I think sometimes, people don't always realize, of course, the Cherokee Nation, and then when we add in the United Kituah Band of Cherokees and the Eastern Band of Cherokees, who are all allowed to receive seeds from the seed bank, that's a lot of people. We are a very large tribe, and when we put in all three bands together, we're a very, very large tribe. And we're actually a very small seed bank. 90% of our seeds are grown here at the Cherokee Nation complex in our Cherokee Nation Heirloom Garden native plant site. And then we have a few of us actually grow some of these plants at our personal residences, so we don't have to worry too much about cross-pollination issues. But that really means that, we're only able to distribute in individual seed packages somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 individual seed packages every year. So it makes it really, really hard to get seeds out to everybody who wants everything, and especially to different varieties that they want. So that's kind of one of the big ways of helping, is if you know that you have other Cherokees around you who are interested in some of these seeds and you happen to have some in excess, help us out in that way. We don't accept them back, but oftentimes people are happy to receive them, and then that kind of takes some of the demand off the seed bank, and they can request some other seeds from us if they're not having to request, something like the squash or one of the bean varieties from us. Yopon holly does grow in Oklahoma. It's kind of something that has been considered to be planted in the area. We're really in a poor site. Our heirloom, our native plant site, most of what we're actually growing as far as our native plants are out there in that site really don't want to grow where they're at. And so we have to be very careful about what we introduce and what we try to make grow in that site, because a lot of times if we're not careful, what we wind up doing is just killing plants, and none of us really want to do that. We only want to put plants out there that have a chance at surviving. And so it sort of has been discussed, but that's part of the issue, is whether or not this is a good site and we can really grow it there. There's always a chance that it might be something that would be introduced in the future. Right now, we're really kind of trying to focus on putting plants out there that are going to be good for being utilized, either for medicinal purpose or just something that we can grow on large scale. So when the community is needing one of these plants, we can get that back to them. And Yopon holly is definitely not something we could grow on a large scale. It would be something that we could put out there for demonstration purposes. So we're kind of focusing our efforts this year on getting some more like maybe New Jersey tea and some more of those prairie willow redroot plants out there, because that's something that there's such a large demand for medicinally, that when we have community members that are really looking for these plants, we hope to be able to start using our site for more medicinal utilization from the community. The squash and the tan pumpkin, I'm going to have to check for sure on that. I believe that they can be grown in the same area, although technically they're both cucurbits, so they may have some issues. Technically, if we're looking at like the scientific name and stuff, unlike the corn and unlike the gourds, they are not actually considered to be the same species. They are different species, which means they shouldn't cross-pollinate. It means that they should both be able to be grown in the same area and not have any problems with cross-pollination. But I do need to check and make sure that that's completely correct, because occasionally even things that are separate species can still have problems with cross-pollination, but they shouldn't. And the Cherokee tan pumpkin, I think, is going to be a popular one. We're not going to have a lot of that available this year, but hopefully in years coming, since this is something that we're just getting introduced here, it's something we plan on growing this summer, we will have a lot more of available seed-wise next year. I think that has gone through all of the questions.
I think it is everything, Feather. Would you mind ending one more time with your contact info and the upcoming seed program, distribution program, the date, and how to contact you for that?
Yes. So again, I am Feather Smith. The email for the seed bank is seedbank@cherokee.org. You can call me at 918-453-5336 with any questions. And I can also help if you're having any problems getting set up on the website. We will go live. We will be accepting seed orders starting Monday, February 1st. So you've just got a few days to get everything registered and get it all good to go. The earlier you get your seed order in, the better. Usually the more likely you are to receive these particular seeds that you're interested in. And of course, once again, if you're wanting any more information or need specific links or anything like that, feel free to email me, seedbank@cherokee.org. I am answering phone calls, but since the seed bank opens Monday, my phone is ringing almost constantly and my email's going off almost constantly. I can usually respond to emails faster than I can respond to phone calls. But if you call and I don't answer, leave a voicemail. I will get back to you as soon as I get an opportunity. Sometimes it just takes some time because, like I said, we really have a lot of phone calls coming in. It should kind of calm down here pretty soon, but that'll be after, probably won't be for a couple weeks before it completely calms down.
Heather, it looks like we have one last question. How tall do you make the mounds for corn, beans, and squash?
Whenever we do corn, we really generally don't grow it on a mound. And that's kind of, we actually do not grow the three of these, our three sisters as a three sisters. It's it's something that's kind of tough to do here in Oklahoma because the range for when these things need to be started and finished are so far apart here, and the heat and everything that we have here is so different from really how they would have been being grown, 200, 300 years ago, that we oftentimes do not grow them as the three sisters together. So with our corn here in especially northeastern Oklahoma, because of the heat, we really don't make mounds, and if we do, it's just sort of a couple inches tall at most, because the further down it is in the ground, the less we're going to have to worry about watering. It's kind of the same way with the beans. The mounds usually aren't any taller than a couple of inches, all sort of depending on how wet we expect the year to be. So sometimes these things are planted directly into the ground, and then sometimes we might make a little bit of a mound whenever we do our rows that's only about 2 or 3 inches tall. Now for the squash, once again, we kind of determine that one based on how wet we're expecting the year, but squash mounds can be anything from about 3 inches to about 6 inches tall, and about a foot in diameter is what we suggest. 3 to 4 seeds per mound is usually good. But like I said, about a foot in diameter, and you want to put those mounds at least a few feet apart, 3 feet apart, because when your squash and your gourd plants will really take over an area. So, in our garden site, we do about 4 to 5 mounds of gourds on one corner of the garden, and then on the other corner of the garden we'll have another 4 to 5 mounds of squash. And both of those areas, that'll easily each take over half of the garden if you let it. So a lot of times we actually start going through and sort of trimming everything off when they start to take up too much space. When planting corn, it kind of depends. Having several rows helps, because it helps that if you get a lot of wind, they kind of help to buffer themselves. But we have also grown where we only have 1 or 2 rows. So, it sort of depends on where you're growing it, but you don't necessarily need to have, 5 or 6 or more rows of corn. You can get away with a fewer rows. But I tend to think that it grows a little bit better if you do about 3 to 4 rows, even if they're very short rows, because they kind of help to hold each other up in those high wind, bad weather conditions. All right, any other questions?
I think that is everything, Heather. Thank you so much for doing this today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me. If anybody has any last follow-up questions, feel free to email me, or of course, you could also contact me by my phone, and I'll try to get any other questions that we may have missed.
Thank you. And everyone will post the full presentation later today on our Facebook page, CCO on Facebook. And we also have a page on YouTube. So we'll get those posted on our Facebook page later today. Thank you again, Heather, for being here today. Somebody suggested this as a series. So we may be asking you back, and we appreciate all you've done to support CCO and getting our cultural programming out there, and even the travel when you've made these presentations in person. So we just thank you for all you do to keep our this important part of our tradition going. Wado.
Wadon.